There can be contracts for everything. If you want a contract for it, you could probably write one. It'll be a Google document. You can put it in an email. You don't need to get a lawyer involved. This concept of the £1 million record deal that you used to see on X Factor, it sounds great.
It's really £1 million loan.
And they don't want £1 million. They want £5 million back. When you think it is wild, the concept of you have created the stuff, the product for them, and they're getting 80% and you're getting 20%. If you are writing with a songwriting partner and you don't have a contract, you're a fool.
Really?
Yes.
Why? Hello, welcome back to Sound Advice. I am joined once again by Grace Goodwin. We are continuing to match in our pink. Grace, how are you?
Yes, I didn't realise we were matching, to be honest. It was clearly intentional, but it's on a Wednesday.
Yeah, we completely planned this out. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about more about what you do as an artist mentor at FutureYard.
So my work is sort of very, very broad. Is that there's artists come in and speak to me about what they're doing, which is the basics of it. They could talk to me about a contract. They could be like, I want to do this gig. I want to find a drummer for my band. Do you know a producer? And then I run like bigger workshops on subjects around like copyright law, contracts, self-employment, that are more like group sessions. But I want everything I do to be very casual and nice and easy to access, because I think a lot of these subjects that I sort of specialise in feel very like cloaked and mystical, and no one wants to understand them, and everyone thinks it's big and scary. And I'm like, no, I'm just like a random Scouse woman telling you about this. It's gonna be fine. Like, this is not as hard as you think it is.
Yeah, well, that's the purpose of this episode, I guess. Is
yes.
More of that music contract side that you've gained a lot of expertise in, and trying to like demystify how a lot of these contracts work, and that they're probably not as big and scary as you might think.
Yeah, definitely, because it's like I am not a music lawyer. I have never trained to be a music lawyer. I have no background in law, and yet I understand contracts. For like, I'm not going to be there when you sign in with Universal Records. You will have an amazing lawyer for that, but you will come to me and go, what do you think of this? And I'll go, I'm not sure of the wording on that. And I might then go, you need advice further, or you know what, that actually looks quite decent. Maybe we should talk about you going into the room negotiating on this and deciding whether to sign it. How did
you sort of gain the expertise that you have in like these kind of contract side of things?
Well, I studied as a drummer at Lipper, and then I really enjoyed all the business modules, and I think I realised that was sort of my strength, was all the written work over being a musician, ironically enough. And then I was just quite interested in that sort of area, and I decided to go on and do a music business and industries masters, which then focused further on these sort of subjects. And I just spent a lot of my own time doing wider reading around these subjects, and realised, and the more musicians I spoke to, the more they didn't understand these things. And
yeah,
thinking, oh, maybe I've got a bit of a niche here of I sort of understand it, but I'm also a musician, so I know how to talk to a musician about it. Because the problem is a lot of these people who talk about these things are lawyers or work in bigger firms, and it feels very like monotonous and a bit boring to talk about. And I'm like, well, no, we need to bring this down to the actual level of the people who are working with it, who are not lawyers and don't really understand these things. It's like, how do I use real life examples and my own experiences to then help their understanding, essentially?
Yeah. So just to get a little bit of an overview, what are the different types of contracts that you kind of, an artist that you work with, you kind of tend to encounter?
So you could have a recording contract, which is your most basic one that you hear about, like, you know, the X Factor, £1 million recording contract, those type. You can have an agreement with a manager, an agreement with a producer. You could sign a contract to record in a studio. You could sign a mini deal with a indie label to just release one single. You could collaborate with an artist on some songwriting for someone else and need a contract for that. Literally, there can be contracts for everything. If you want a contract for it, you could probably write one or get a template for one.
Yeah, but I suppose you can have a contract for anything, but what would you say are the types of things, the types of relationships that artists really like need a contract for?
If you are writing with a songwriting partner and you don't have a contract, you're a fool.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Because if you are writing with someone, you need to agree, because we're talking about just your publishing here. So the rights that are in songwriting. So songwriting and publishing is split into two distinct copyrights. It is the lyrics and the music. And if you're working, say me and you were working together on a song, and I wrote all of the lyrics and you wrote all of the music, then we're technically 50-50 ownership of that song, but we've never discussed it. We've never ever talked about it. We just left the room really happy with the song. That song then becomes #1 in the UK for a big artist we've given it to. And then you come in and go to me, well, yeah, but I think I contributed a little bit more than you to that song. And I'm like, oh, well, actually, I thought it was a sort of 50-50 split. And then see where the debate comes in, because there's 20 grand on the table in royalties, and we're now arguing over this. Whereas if we'd in that room on day one decided, you know what, this is a 50-50 split, we're going to write this down on a piece of paper, we've agreed this. So then when the money does come in, we could go, yeah, we're splitting it 50-50, or say 70-30, whatever contribution we feel, because you might have contributed more than me, or the other way round. But if you've never written that down, how is that enforceable? And when money's involved, it can cause a lot of rifts with people. We've seen it historically with a lot of bands, a lot of songwriters falling out with each other because people don't feel that they're getting their dues or they're getting the right amount of money and things like that. So I'm always a big advocate of, even if it feels awkward and weird with your mate, to sit down and go, what do I own in this and what do you own? It's just a basic you should do from day one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important because songwriting as well can be so like subjective. Like you can think that, as you said, one person wrote the lyrics and one person wrote the melody, but even someone could make a claim that because they hummed along to the whilst you were playing them and da 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 da, that they own some of the melody. So it can be really subjective like that.
There's so many different routes. We're just going to talk about songwriting. You could go for the diplomatic approach, which is I refer to as the Coldplay approach. We all know that Chris Martin is the main songwriter in that band, but the 4 members of that band split their publishing equally, so they all earn equal amounts of money. Then you've got the Beatles approach, which is, for some Beatles songs, Lennon and McCartney, the most famous songwriting duo ever, probably of all time, wrote some of them songs. So that means that George and Ringo don't make any money from the publishing on those songs, and you can see why that might cause a rift in a band. But also, it's fair, because they didn't write the songs. And then you might have I'm a solo artist and I wrote them myself. You don't need an agreement with anyone then. You just know that you have written those songs. Or you may work with a producer. So that's where the relationship can be a little bit more murky of knowing who did what when. Because your producer is obviously a hired role for you to get in to help. But then they might contribute to songwriting. But if they're not contributing to the songwriting, then you shouldn't be giving them any publishing royalties. And that's a mistake a lot of artists make.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, just as you said, the idea of sitting your mates down and signing a contract can probably be quite scary, but it can be quite simple, can't it, for those kind of things?
You can be a Word document on a computer that says this song was written on this date by these 2 people. Grace owns X amount of it, and so owns this amount.
And that can be it.
It'll be a Google document. You can put it in an email. You don't need to get a lawyer involved, but it's just that little piece of paper, because you just never know what might happen with that music and that song. None of us can really predict what's going to happen. So it's better to just have that awkward conversation. And once you've got into the habit of doing it, it doesn't feel awkward and weird. It just becomes part of the course of, this is what we do when we write.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think, as I said, it can be quite awkward, but I think it's one of those things you probably don't think about in the early stages, because you probably haven't had the success, but I think you definitely feel differently about it. If you knew in advance that song was going to suddenly get 1 million streams, you'd feel different about wanting that.
Yeah, so I'm we'll treat every song as if it's going to be a success.
Because you want it to be a success.
Yeah,
and you're going to try and make it a success.
Yeah.
So you can't then make it a success and then be disappointed that you didn't sort of sort your contract out and get your house in order.
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than if it does become a success and then you fight between your mates over 1%. It's that just becomes really sad then, doesn't it? So it's better to just have the awkward conversation. I always use the example, in the, obviously for cultural reference points, like Judge Judy and Judge Rinder. It's everyone's seen those programs, and I'm like, if you've been sitting at home of a weekend or a weekday for me watching that, and the amount of people arguing and battling things out because no one signs a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And no one talks to each other, and then people use Facebook messages as evidence and everything. And I'm like, this is a prime example of why you should just write stuff down and agree things, because then you get people on Judge Rinder fighting it out over stupid stuff.
Yeah. We've kind of gone into the publishing side, so let's start there. Can you just sort of break down what a publishing deal is and how they typically work?
So a publishing deal is you being like, okay, I have written songs. This is just my publishing. I'm now going to license that to a company who are then going to exploit that for me. And we're going to, I say split, but it won't be a 50-50 split in most cases. We're going to share some profits in that. So it's their job as a bigger company like Universal or whoever to exploit my publishing for money that we both then benefit from.
just to sort of sum up some of the basics, so for anyone who's unfamiliar, what is a performing rights organisation?
So performing rights organisation like PRS that you talk about, they collect royalties on your behalf. So if you're a songwriter and your song is performed in an arena, or you performed in a little bar, or the song is played in a shop, say you're in Tesco and you hear your song, you are owed royalties for the fact that your songs are being performed in public. So that money then comes back to you through PRS, but you obviously have to register with them and register your songs, and that's your responsibility to do. If you're not an artist assigned to a label, that's what, you need to register hello, these are my songs, I've written these, now please, I would like some money to come in from my songs.
Yeah. Let's move on to record deals.
Yes.
Because I think to a lot of people, record deals can feel like this sort of quite distant idea, but as you mentioned, there are more and more like indie labels and labels who do like mini deals and stuff like that. So it's more a possibility than I think people think. Can you just sort of break down what the basic concept of a record deal is and what it sort of looks like?
Yeah, because I used to run a record label, so I had to like negotiate a deal for our artists. So the basics of it is we are contracting you to record this thing with us, and we want it to be released, and we are going to fund this part of it. And then you may have, if it's a bit more of a complex deal, it may go, okay, well, we're picking up this album with the option to have 3 more albums from you if this one does well. And if the first one doesn't do well, we basically drop you, which sounds really sad, but that's how it works with business. And it's basically like, we're investing in this product for you to release this. You will get the first half of your advance when you sign this deal, and when you deliver the album, you get the second half of your advance. That's the basics of a sort of record deal if you're signing a sort of traditional one.
What is an advance?
So an advance is, okay, well, we think that you're a good test case for this. We're going to give you money that you can then use for what you sort of need, essentially, and we fund all the rest. So an advance is, we're investing in you. So a lot of people use their advances to live off while they're creating the music that is then going to put out. But the problem is you've got to think with all these things it's recuperable, which means they are not giving you money for free. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. You are a business prospect. So the more you spend, the more you have to give back. So this concept of the £1 million record deal that you used to see on X Factor, it sounds great to like, I'm going to be given £1 million.
It's really £1 million loan.
But you have to give £1 million back, and they don't want £1 million. They want 5 million back. So, which sounds really depressing, I'm aware. But you've got to think of it, it's a business transaction. It's not like applying for funding and getting a grant off someone. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing this because they are a business and they want money. And the more money you spend, the more they want back. And I think a lot of artists don't really get that concept. They think, I'm just getting given all this money and I get to make music. It's like, yeah, but you have to recoup that money as well.
Yeah. Can you just like sort of explain how recoupment works? Like, how would that typically go if you release your album or whatever it is?
Yeah, there's different models, but it's basically like, say they spend 100 grand on all the music, all the release around your record. Before you earn 1 penny, you need to earn 100 grand back through the release of your music. That's as simple as it goes. And then, depending on your power stance and where you are in your career, once it's past that, you've earned what we've spent on you back. It's then, okay, well, how are we going to split that? It will always be in the record company's favour, whether you agree with that or not, most of the time. But you then are sort of going, okay, well, how are we going to split this? We've made back the 100 grand. We've done really well with that. Now, what about the 50 grand that's coming in after that? How are we going to split that?
Yeah, how would it... I know it's different for a lot of labels, but how would it typically be split?
I could not give you a figure because I've never seen like the bigger labels deals, but it's probably always going to be in their favour. Yeah, essentially.
I think I was doing a bit of research on this the other day, and I think I've heard that with some of the bigger labels, it's often like around 80-20 towards the label.
that's I think that's probably one of the, whether that's changed or not now, but 80-20 from the generic record label deals you can get is it's always in their favour.
Yeah.
But when you think it is wild, the concept of you have created the stuff, the product for them, and they're getting 80% and you're getting 20%, even though they've funded it for you. If you've made that back, I don't really know if that's justified. I think in my ideal, beautiful utopia, it should be a 50-50 split of like, okay, well, you're given all the resources, but I'm given the creativity and the product that you need to sell. But we don't live in that world, unfortunately.
I suppose the record label's reasoning there would be that if you don't recoup the money, you're not in debt. You don't owe them like money. If you never make another penny from your music, you're not generally in debt to the label. So they do take.
No.
So they take. I think their argument would be that they take the risk of investing in you, knowing that they might not get it back. But when they do get it back, they get a lot of it back. I do find it funny because like if you imagine the concept of a record deal, but you just made that alone, I don't think anyone would take it out.
That's the thing. I think if it's understanding what you're getting and what you're giving away is a big thing, because I think even moving away from the actual legal side of it, the creative control, because there's a big difference between a label putting 100 grand into you and then you being like, I just want to make my music, but if you're not going in the direction they want, at the end of the day, they're putting 100 grand into it, so they're probably going to try and bend you to their will in a way. You can fight back, but at the same time, you're not the one with the financial power in that dynamic, which works for some artists. Great, I'm not knocking it if you want to sign to a label and do that. But then for some artists, that creative control is really important. So it's like, is this dynamic the best one for you? That's another big thing as well. But yeah, seeing if you basically, they'd spend 100 grand on you and you only make 10 back in an awful situation, you don't have to worry that you have to then pay them 90 grand back. The way it works depressingly, you get dropped and they write that off. And they don't pick you up for another album. Yeah. Which, it is awful, but it's better than you owing them 90 grand. Yeah. So it's a business risk for them, essentially. Yeah. An investment. An investment portfolio like people do with property and other things. That's what it is at the end of the day. That's what an artist is.
So you mentioned, obviously, they have the financial power in a lot of these situations. How do you sort of... I mean, it might not be that you're going into Universal, but either way, the label's the one with, when you're meeting with them, they're the ones with the money on the table. How do you sort of balance that power dynamic to be able to, like, negotiate?
You have an excellent lawyer. Yeah. If you're going into a room with Universal, you don't walk in with me. I am not the person you take into that room. You take in a lawyer, a very, very good lawyer, who you probably have on retainer. So, but getting to that stage where you can pay them, that's another issue altogether.
What about on the smaller scale?
So on the smaller scale, like literally this week, I've been sent a producer agreement by someone, and I'm looking it over for them to be like, is this okay to sign? And at that level, it can be okay. And if you're a member of the Musicians Union, which everyone should be if you're a musician, you can get free legal advice from them. If you have a contract, you get them to look it over, and they may be like, do not sign this. Or they may go, I think it's okay, but maybe you need to speak to a lawyer. Here's our list of approved lawyers. So there's different techniques. But if you're walking into a room with a bigger label, you need a good lawyer. But this is where I advocate for education in this area. It's good for you to be able to read that document, not rely on someone else to read it for you. Yeah. That you should be able to read it and get the basic terms, but then you go, I actually don't understand clause 5 or whatever. And it's like, well, fine, that's really niche, weird law language that none of us get because we're not lawyers. But reading a piece of paper and understanding what the basic idea is so important. And a lot of artists sort of seem to rely on not learning these things and then getting in the team who do it for them. And I'm like, but it's so much more empowering for you to understand it in the first place, because then you can sit with your lawyer and stuff and go, well, actually, I don't think this works for me. And then they can backtrack to you and go, well, actually, the label would never accept this, whatever. So there's different routes you can go down, but understanding what you're looking at, it sounds like a really basic idea, but it's a thing that a lot of artists shy away from.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think especially if you are in a position where you can use a lawyer to like help you, I think it's often a case of like, that's their job, I'll steer away from it. But then you're kind of, as much as there's someone fighting your corner, you're leaving all the power to another third party.
Yeah, you should have questions. Yeah. You shouldn't just go, yeah, you do your lawyer thing and law this for me. It's like, that's not how this works. It's like, no, you need to understand it as well. And you might have a manager and they might have questions as well. But it needs to be this sort of team dynamic. It's not just, you have this expertise, so everything is down to you.
You mentioned a producer deal. Can you just sort of explain how those work?
So producer deals can be very different depending on the level of the producer. There might be a producer, say I'm an artist working in Liverpool and I want to hire this producer. They may charge me £300 for a session, and that's their flat fee. But then there are more established producers who might go, okay, well, I'm Rick Rubin or whoever. I'm an incredibly big deal. I will charge you 20 grand for a session, which is fair enough because it's Rick Rubin, but I also want 5% royalties. in your publishing. And you're like, oh my God, this is stressful. Oh my God. And it's deciding whether that's right, because in a way they can sort of justify it a little bit more, because they are at the level they're at, they're hit makers. They're the people you go to when you want to do well. So they will have a fee to work with them, but then they will also ask for royalties as well. But how you split that is it's sort of an agreement with the producer. But the level we're working at, most producers will not be asking for royalties.
I did want to move on to some of like the pitfalls of contracts and like ways. How can contracts sort of be used to exploit artists?
Using language that people don't understand, and for example, I think a thing I've seen recently is people asking for songwriting royalties, like publishing royalties for things that they're not owed it on. Like there's a producer, I'm not going to name any names, who would work with an artist that I knew, that I was talking to, and the artist didn't have the money to pay for the studio time. So the producer then asked for royalties for the publishing. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. This is not right, because they didn't write the song. And it's like, well, if they then own 50% of your song, despite not having written on it, they can block any use of it they want. If you want to re-record it, if you want to put it on an advert, they can block that technically. Whereas the producer would have been well within their rights to go, okay, well, I own 100% of your master in replacement of payment. That would have been fine. But to go for those publishing, so that's the thing that's sort of happening lately that I'm not really a fan of, that I'm like, you need to protect these, because you shouldn't be giving this random person who didn't write the song any royalties. So I think that's really important. So these sort of pitfalls are coming up. Like, you see new little things that people are doing to get royalties from different places to earn money. Yeah.
Do you have any more examples of that? Because I think there's a lot of, I'd said a lot of the time it's use of like language that people might not understand.
Yeah. I think the re-record clause, which I think is quite prominent now, Taylor Swift, like none of us are going to be of Taylor Swift levels anytime soon, but say you record something with someone for a label, if it's on a short deal, and they may go, you can't re-record this for 40 years, or in perpetuity, which means life, basically, a life sentence. It's like, well, is this the best? Do I really want this? Should this label have this much power? So, but a lot of now bigger labels are doing that because of Taylor Swift, because of obviously her re-recording all her old masters, which makes sense. So they're now protecting their own backs for that. So that's another thing that's sort of coming up, is the in perpetuity.
Yeah. Another thing, I was doing a bit of research on this the other day, and another thing that I've seen a lot of is, and I believe it's called, the way they described it is cross-collateralization of deals, which is a fun term. But it was basically about how sometimes when you sign a longer-term record deal, as you said, they might drop you, but there'll also be a situation where you can't then record music and you're sort of trapped.
Yeah, so that's a basic example of, like, they may have a thing in your contract where this is one thing they can do. They can say, okay, we're going to record your music, but then they could choose to never release that music. And if there's no clause in your contract that says that they have to release it, then they could just hold on to your album forever and never release it. But yeah, that thing, what was it called again?
It was, the website described it as cross-collateralization of contracts.
See, that's
baffling term.
That's an example of a term of, like, I don't know what that means, but when you actually explained it, I was like, oh yeah, no people do that. But yeah, just sort of just holding artists like this, and not releasing their music is quite a common one as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was saying about how often, like, an artist they'll have another album, and then if they get dropped and they're allowed to do another album, they can still take, if you haven't recouped
they can take it on the new deal.
They can still take it on the new deal. Yeah.
So they'll take it from your royalties, not the new labels, if that makes sense. So I think that's, from what my knowledge, that's how they do it. But it's like all these things, this is where a lawyer comes in, because that term you just used that I've already forgotten. I'd look at that and go, what?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean? So this is where a good lawyer comes in and explains it to you in layman's terms.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an area that a lot of artists aren't familiar with. How on earth do you sort of find a lawyer?
God, even I'm not that good, because I'm the person you speak to when you don't have a lawyer. That's my role in all this. I'm the person who gives you that first level of advice. But I've met some amazing music lawyers. All the people I know who've got lawyers, it's been like, this person know this person who's worked with this person. Like, I met a really cool lawyer based in London from a band I was in, and he was a really nice fella. And I was like, I get a nice vibe from him, I would work with him. But then I saw his price list and I was like, oh my God. Luckily, I wasn't really involved in that side of it, but it's a bit of a mystery to me how artists sort of get these lawyers, because I think of quite a lot of them, the one we were going to work with, he was willing to sort of do it for free at the start with the idea that we then sign a lovely deal and then the money's coming in. And then obviously it's great for him. And when we walked into his office and saw all the gold discs he had on his wall, it made a good case that he knew what he was doing. He knew how to pick good artists. I'm not going to say who it is because that feels a bit weird, but he definitely knew what he was doing. Put it that way. He was working with some of the biggest artists I know, and I was quite impressed, to be honest. But it's like trying to remove that star power of like, is this person the right one for me? Because that's a personal relationship as well. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, you also mentioned that there's places where you can find like an approved list. Was it the Musicians Union?
Yeah, Musicians Union. If you speak to them and their law firm, who look at the contracts in the first place, they can then obviously then go, okay, well, we think you need this get and look at, and they might have an approved list as well. And another thing I think all artists should do, I recommend this to every single artist I speak to, there's a book called Music the Business by Anne Harrison. I've never met Anne Harrison, but I feel like I'm her biggest fan, and I feel like I need royalties in a book now myself because the amount of people I've made buy this book.
Yeah.
If you want to know the basics of music business, you just need this book. This is what I use to get me to the stage where I understood stuff, and she updates it every few years for so I'm very excited to see what she's going to talk about, like AI and copyright, because obviously when she first wrote it, even Spotify wasn't a thing, but she's like a really amazing music lawyer. So I feel like if everyone could have Anne Harrison as their lawyer, they'd be great, they'd be grand.
Yeah, I mean, another one that I need to have a look at that. Another one that I like is it's a very popular one, but that All You Need to Know About the Music Business by, I think, Donald Passman is a really good one.
That's good, but the only difference with that is a lot of it's focused on American
music
law, which can be a bit different.
I've got a version. I've got like the British version, and under like a lot of the American things, he's put like little captions and stuff with like a British flag of like how it's different. So
that's good.
That's useful. Because
the version I have that book, but I think some of it didn't.
Yeah, definitely.
I was a bit like, this is definitely applying to the US because their copyright law is different to ours and everything, which is something we haven't even touched on, like copyright and all things like that. Be here forever.
You mentioned copyright law. Obviously, we don't have too long left, but if you just want to like give a little summary of how. That's too big of a question to ask, but like...
No, it's okay. I'm used to... See, one of my big things is I'll teach about copyright. So copyright is the basic of you own this thing. Other people have to ask your permission to use it. That's what copyright is. So when I draw a picture, write a song, write a book, you can't just then remake or republish my book, song, or make a poster of my picture. You have to ask my permission because I'm the owner of that. So that's the basic of what copyright is. And copyright is basically from the moment of creation until 70 years after the death of the author. So an author is used as the term for everything, not just writers.
Yeah.
So it can be an artist, whatever. So that's why you see stuff going out of copyright. Like Mickey Mouse has literally just come out of copyright. The original, Steamboat Willie, I think his name was. So he's now usable. But the Mickey Mouse with gloves on is still in copyright.
Yeah, I think I actually saw another one is someone did a Winnie the Pooh horror movie.
Yes, that's a great example.
Winnie the Pooh was out of contract.
So I think Disney is one of the best concepts of protecting copyright and being very very strict about their own copyright because of their branding and stuff and how it can be used. But another example is The Great Gatsby. That is technically out of copyright. I could tomorrow publish my own version of The Great Gatsby if I wanted to.
Yeah, I think a lot of those, I remember when I was downloading books onto my mum's Kindle, I think a lot of like older books that are set over 70 years old, they're all just available for free because you can't, it's not like copyrighted to be sold in like a digital version anymore.
But it's interesting because you still walk into Waterstones and you'll still see copies of The Great Gatsby from all different publishers.
Yeah,
so you can. So
it
it becomes basically a free for all. That's what it means. Is you have the creative license to do what you want with this product. I could make my own Muppets version. Well, not Muppets because that's in copyright. But if the Muppets wanted to make a version of The Great Gatsby, they wouldn't need permission from Fitzgerald or his estate because he's dead. Yeah, essentially.
So if you've written a song, how do you sort of register it to be copyrighted?
So there's no official way to register copyright. The best thing I say to do is record it on your phone, which sounds very basic. Just make a voice note. You're playing the song, and it'll have the metadata behind it that you recorded on this date. Because the old way used to be you made a tape and sent it to yourself and didn't open it. But you
Yeah,
don't
and you
you
had, like,
don't
the
need
little
to do
post-stamp
you
thing.
don't need to do that now because we no longer live in 1972. We
Yeah.
have the internet and we have phones, so you can literally just record it, and there'll be timestamps and data behind that,
Yeah,
which
and
proves that it's your
that's
track.
enough.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, because I think I used to. I remember reading up when I was like, this is so funny. When I was like 10, someone was like, "Oh, but are your songs copyrighted?" I was like, "No, I don't know. I'd written like 3 songs at this point. I don't know why I was that fussed about it." But I remember like googling, and it said to do the stamp thing, and that like I think it used to be a bit of a misconception that like those kind of digital things wouldn't necessarily count, but I think they are now kind of generally accepted.
Well, no, I think it does count. I think a lawyer would look at that and go, well, there's metadata behind it, and it proves this point, because a lot of people don't use physical media in the same way and don't send letters and don't. A lot of people e-sign documents now and things like that. So it's definitely it's very different to how it used to be in that respect. I think a lot of legal entities now have to accept that a lot of it is done not in the physical realm anymore.
Yeah. No,
which sounds very meta.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just like simple things like recording a voice note, or maybe like if it's words that you want to make sure you're safe, just like emailing it to yourself.
Yeah,
or something
and
like that.
Like
Just
you've got it on Google Drive, whatever. Things like that. Really simple. Because copyright exists from the moment of creation. Even if you're in a room by yourself and no one's ever seen you create it, you create a copyright. But it's then protecting your copyright is important as well.
Yeah, I suppose it's technically copyrighted, but if you write a song, never record it, never
How'd you prove it?
write it down, and someone overhears it and turns it into a smash hit, you can't prove it.
Yeah, it's like, well, you've got no proof. It's the Judge Judy thing all over again. Where's the proof? Show me the piece of paper. Show me the contract. Show me the Facebook message.
Yeah. Just to wrap things up, I'm gonna set you up easily here. Okay. If you're based in Merseyside and looking for free advice on like music contracts, or like looking to like develop your artist career, where should you go and what should you do, Grace?
What an interesting question. So if you come to Future Yard in Birkenhead, we have a free to access for everyone program called Propeller. And it's not just mentoring sessions. We have workshops, gigs, events, like open days with people like PRS for music, things like that. And we're there to help you. It's a very nice casual thing. We have a really nice relationship with all the artists we work with. And you can just come talk to us about anything to do with your project.
Anything?
Literally, I have people that turn into a therapy session because they talk to me about how their personal life is impacting on their project. And so I have a really nice relationship with all the artists I work with now, and I go see their shows, see what they're up to. And yeah, I actively want to help you to do well. That's all I want to do. So that's what I'm there for at the end of the day. And there's also Kath and Katie, who are the other 2 mentors as well, who are there to sort of support in any way possible. And my area is sort of like all the contracts, the business, the stuff that you don't want to talk about, but you do need to talk about.